Alright folks, we're gonna try to do this example. The previous one doesn't really show, the reason why I don't want to do the part A of the warm-up is because it doesn't really show as well my method. So I'm decided to use part B. Yes, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but trust me, it's going to be a lot better. Alright, so let's first draw the graph. Okay, and take note that we will need to use a graph for the later part, or rather in my explanation. So this graph is t as an x-axis and function as a y-axis. Okay, so what do we know? We know that when t is from 0 to 2 pi, which is essentially one cycle of a trigonometry, be it sine or cosine, it equals to sine t. So I believe it should look something like this from 0 to 2 pi. Then what does it look like after t is more than 2 pi? It becomes t minus 2 pi, which is, if I'm not wrong, it's going to look something like this. I think. I'm not too sure, but this is not the main thing I'm trying to go through for this part. So, how do I craft my function? So take note, what I like to do is ft equals to original function plus, okay, now this is where the special thing comes in. It's going to be very confusing, but trust me on this. Final minus initial ft then the unit step. What this final minus initial ft is essentially just your delta in your ft. Allow me to go through. So for the original function, it's basically essentially just the top half. Okay, what is your function before the switch comes in? Like before you turn on or off your switch, or before the variable change comes, before the pigeon hit your drone. Right? So it's basically your sine t before the external force come into play, something like that. What is your unit step? I'm going to talk about unit step first, okay? Your unit step is basically this part. So essentially just your ft, if you think about it that way. 2 pi. But remember, unit step have the u. Alright? Now what is this delta function? Very simple. It's basically just, like I said, your final minus initial. In this case, your final minus initial, which is basically your unit step variable minus your original function. Okay? So to fully write out what is your ft, is basically sine t plus t minus 2 pi minus sine t times your unit step. So this is your function. Now here comes the fun part, which is essentially Laplace. So how do I Laplace this whole thing? Okay, to make life easier, I'm going to break things down a little bit. I'm going to label this as ht, and I'm going to label this as gt, basically giving them a new function, and then this is obviously your ut, something like that. Okay, so let's start with ht first. I think Laplace ht is very simple. It's from the is given, so it becomes like this. But now comes the unit step, right? So how do I Laplace this thing? So now if I were to Laplace my gt ut, is basically, okay, what I like to do is, let's label this as t minus alpha. So alpha, exponential negative alpha s times your Laplace of what's inside here? I don't know. Let's talk about it later. Okay, so this is essentially your unit step. Marker. This part is your unit step. Okay. So now what becomes the purple question mark? Well, we technically touched UT already, but we haven't touched GT yet. But it's not really GT, but rather I want to say that it's a GT abstract. I don't want to use prime because we know that T prime equals to delta T over delta something. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit confusing for you guys. So I don't want to use prime. Okay, so I'm just going to use T abstract. Capital T is also a bit confusing, so yeah. So what's going to be in this Laplace over here? Maybe let's go back to the graph. So essentially we are touching on the second half when t is more than 2 pi. But to make life easier, I want to, in a way, generate a new graph. What do I mean by that? I want to make my new point the origin. So instead of my origin being at 0 over here, I want to essentially make a new 0 over here. Okay, so I'm just going to label it like 0 abstract. So this is now essentially my new origin. So where do I get this new origin? It's basically t plus 2 pi, which is essentially my t abstract. Okay, so like I say, in my this Laplace over here is t abstract. So if I were to write it out, okay, now I'm just going to isolate this part. It's going to be lambda g over t abstract. And what is my g? My g is over here. Okay, this is my g. Oh, wrong one. Okay, this is my g. But now all this becomes t abstract. Okay, and since I know that my t abstract is t plus 2 pi, I'm going to sub it in, because at the end of the day I'm still like using doing my working with respect to t, not t abstract. So if I were to sub it in, it becomes t plus 2 pi minus 2 pi minus sine t plus 2 pi. Okay? So we know that 2 pi can cancel each other. And we know that 2 pi also is one whole cycle. So essentially this just becomes sine t. So if I were to simplify it, it becomes t minus sine t. And remember, I sub it back into my Laplace, so it's basically solving for this. And whoa, life is so simple. How do I Laplace t? Laplace t is just 1 over s squared minus, then sine is just s squared plus 1. But remember, this is not the final. Remember this part? We still got this. So technically, if I were to just sub it back in, okay, it's just what is it again? Alpha. Where did I put alpha? Oh, it's 2 pi. It's minus 2 pi. Sorry. 2 pi s. Because remember I said that 2 pi and alpha. Yeah. So this is not my final answer yet. Okay, then if I were to just put everything back in, because remember I still got my sine, so in the end becomes like this. Tada! Which is here. Yep, remember this?